Good afternoon, students, and welcome to today's lecture. We all know that in plants, the process of reproduction takes place by sexual means, which means the process of reproduction in plants is carried out by the process of sexual reproduction only. The process of sexual reproduction involves the formation of special sex cells, and these special sex cells are also called as gametes. These gametes are further of two types. The first one is the male gamete, which is found in the male body, and second one is the female gamete, which is found in the female body. Now, for a new organism to be produced, these male gametes and the female gametes need to unite together, a process commonly termed as the fertilization process, which means the process of fertilization is necessary for a new organism to born by sexual means. Now the question arises, since plants are immotile, which means they cannot move from one place to another, how these male gametes are transferred to the female gamete, or how these male gametes come in contact with the female gametes? So this occurs by a process called as the pollination. What do you mean by pollination? The transfer of pollen grains, which is the male sex cells, from the anther of a stamen. Where is the anther? This part, sac-like structure, is called as the anther of a stamen. This whole reproductive part is called as the stamen. To the stigma of a carpel. Stigma, this is the sticky part, and this whole female part is called as the carpel, is called pollination, which means the process of transfer of the male sex cells or the pollen grains from the anther, which is the male reproductive part, which is a sac-like structure in the male reproductive part, which is called as the stamen, to the stigma, which is the sticky part present in the female reproductive organ, okay, called as the carpel or the pistil. So this transfer of male sex cells to the female part to come in contact for the process of fertilization to carry out is called as the pollination. Once again, so the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a carpel is called as pollination process. Now this pollination process can be carried out by various means. First one is the air process. Okay, for the process of pollination to occur via air, the pollen grains need to be very light so that they can float in air. So those plants in which the pollination takes place by air method, by air means, are very light. Second, those plants which are found inside the water, which means the aquatic plants as well as on the water, surface of the water, the process of pollination takes place with the help of the floating water. Okay. Third, in those plants in which the pollen grains are heavy and cannot be transferred by wind, takes place by two methods. The first is by animals, via insects, or via birds. Now the process of pollination is further of two types. The first one is the self-pollination, as the name is indicating that the pollination is occurring within the flower. Okay, and the cross-pollination. Cross means the flowers are different now. So now one by one we will discussing what is self-pollination and what is cross-pollination. So now what is the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination? Actually, what happens when the transfer of pollen grains takes place from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower, it is called as self-pollination. Also, when the process of transfer of pollen grains from one anther is taking place to the stigma of different flower, but this flower is present on the same plant, it is called as self-pollination process. Okay, now this will become clear with this example. Suppose the anther, this anther, it contains the pollen grains. This pollen grains, if they land on the stigma of the same flower, It is called as self-pollination. Suppose these pollen grains do not land on the stigma of the same flower, instead they are landing on the stigma of a different flower, but this flower is present on the same plant. So this is an example of self-pollination process. While in cross-pollination, what happens? The transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower takes place to the stigma of different flower which is present on the different plant. Okay, suppose the pollen grains which are released from these anthers, they do not land on the stigma of the same flower. Instead, they are landing on the stigma of a different flower, and this different flower is not present on the same plant, but this different flower is present on a different plant. Then this process is called as the cross pollination process. So this was all about the pollination process. I hope this video was a help to you. Keep watching the video, keep sharing the video, keep subscribing the channel. Stay home, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.